Imagine a modern construction site where crews wait months for blueprints to be approved. It seems that even erecting a simple fence today requires dozens of permits and heavy machinery. Now imagine an army that, after an exhausting march, builds a fortified city in just 3 hours. For a Roman legionnaire, this wasn't a feat of heroism, but a completely routine evening routine before bed. It sounds like a physical anomaly or a blatant exaggeration by ancient historians, doesn't it? However, archaeological excavations across Europe confirm the reality of these temporary wooden fortresses. The Romans understood one brilliant thing: an army is most vulnerable when its soldiers are asleep. Therefore, they decided that a safe night's sleep was worth absolutely any physical effort. Many ancient armies operated like ordinary nomads. They would toss their sleeping bags by the campfire, post sentries, and hope for the best. Roman generals viewed this approach with undisguised horror and professional contempt. They turned the process of setting up a military camp into a precise mathematical science. Rome's enemies often tried to attack the legions under cover of darkness, but instead of sleeping men in a clearing, they stumbled upon an impenetrable wall with guards. From these fortifications, a deadly hail of heavy pillums rained down on them. The Romans literally brought their own fortress into enemy territory every night. Now we'll break down the anatomy of Roman military construction step by stunning step. You'll learn how ancient engineers used the simplest tools to achieve perfect geometry. We'll understand why strict standardization of processes became the main secret behind their incredible speed. This is a story of how iron discipline overcame any chaos. Get ready to be amazed by just how advanced the technologies of the harsh ancient world were. Modern project managers certainly have a lot to learn from the centurions of 2,000 years ago. Forget everything you knew about ancient wars from glossy Hollywood movies. The true story of Rome's victories was written not only with swords, but also with ordinary shovels. Most ancient empires strictly divided their people into warriors and ordinary laborers. Some brandished swords with flair, while others hauled heavy stones under the shouts of overseers. The Roman Republic broke this stereotype by combining both professions in a single hardy individual. Every legionary was required to become a professional digger and a skilled carpenter. This decision seems illogical, since elite fighters shouldn't have to waste their strength on menial labor. Why force the world's best infantry to wade through spring mud? The answer lies in logistics. The army simply couldn't drag thousands of slow-moving builders along with it. Speed of movement determined the outcome of wars, so the builders had to march alongside everyone else. Every Roman soldier's equipment included more than just a heavy shield and a sharp sword. On their backs hung axes, pickaxes, saws, and special baskets for carrying earth. This entire engineering kit weighed almost as much as the combat armor itself. Modern special forces also carry a huge load, but they don't have to build barracks before going to sleep. A recruit's training did not begin with elegant sword duels. Their first task was to learn how to hold a shovel properly and dig perfectly straight trenches. Training in boot camps continued until calluses turned to stone. If a soldier did not know how to build, his chances of surviving a campaign were zero. Engineering skills were instilled in the army through an incredibly rigorous system of endless repetition. Recruits might build and dismantle the training camp twice in a single day. Modern psychologists call this the formation of muscle memory through extreme exertion. Roman instructors simply called it a good excuse to use the punishment rod. As a result, each legion became an autonomous, mobile fortification factory. They didn't need outside contractors or face delays due to supply issues. All the tools and labor were already right on the site of the future construction. This remarkable self-sufficiency made the Roman military machine completely unpredictable to its enemies. Interestingly, the legionnaires themselves were incredibly proud of their calloused hands. Many soldiers' tombstones depict their construction tools rather than captured weapons. Being a good engineer was considered just as much of an honor as being a fearless warrior in battle. This cultural shift forever changed the very concept of a professional army. Imagine a modern office where programmers, after writing code, build their own server room. It sounds like the height of managerial absurdity from a labor union's worst nightmare. But in ancient Rome, such versatility was the key to world domination. You either knew how to do everything, or you fed the crows on the battlefield. Combining roles gave generals unprecedented tactical flexibility during large-scale campaigns. Julius Caesar could order his troops to erect a gigantic wall right in the middle of a battle. The soldiers simply set aside their swords, picked up shovels, and transformed the landscape beyond recognition. Meanwhile, the enemy stood in shock, watching this industrial madness unfold. It was the shovel, not the famous short sword, that made Rome the greatest empire. The legions literally dug themselves into the conquered lands, leaving insurmountable obstacles in their wake. No other army in history has been able to replicate this engineering triumph, but for such work they needed a flawless coordinate system. If you asked 100 people to build a house today, you'd get 100 different houses. In the Roman army, 100,000 different soldiers built absolutely identical fortifications. The secret to their incredible speed lay in the obsessive, almost frightening standardization of the entire process. They had no time for creative exploration or architectural experimentation. The layout of a Roman field camp was strictly defined in official military regulations. Every square meter of the territory had a specific purpose, known to every recruit. The commander's tent, the grain stores, and the infirmary were always located in the same places. Soldiers could find their way around the camp even at night with their eyes closed. This universality meant that a legionnaire from Spain could join a unit in Syria. He didn't need to retrain or ask for directions to the latrine. From the very first moment, he knew where his tent was and where to dig a trench. Today we call this corporate standards, but the Romans called it common sense. The shape of the camp was always a strict rectangle with slightly rounded corners. The length and width were calculated using precise mathematical formulas depending on the number of troops. Engineers knew by heart how many paces to step back for a legion of 5,000 men. No guesswork, no rough estimates, just dry, cold geometry. Inside the camp, the streets intersected at a perfect 90-degree angle. Two main roads formed a cross, dividing the territory into neat, functional blocks. It resembles the modern layout of New York City, only conceived 2,000 years before its founding. The simple grid of streets allowed troops to move instantly to the necessary wall in case of an alarm. Standardization solved the main problem of any large-scale construction project: decision-making chaos. On modern construction sites, foremen spend hours arguing about where to dump debris and where to place a crane. For the Romans, these issues were resolved as early as the basic military training phase. Everyone knew their role, which completely eliminated confusion during the construction of the walls. Even the width of the trench and the height of the rampart were strictly regulated down to the centimeter. A typical field camp required a trench 1 meter deep and 1.5 meters wide. If an attack was expected, these dimensions were instantly doubled by order of the tribune. And again, no meetings. The soldiers simply began digging twice as deep. This approach stripped the army of its individuality, but granted it incredible efficiency. The entire system functioned like a perfectly oiled clockwork mechanism of enormous proportions. Enemies hoped for chaos during the setting up of the camp, but saw only silent ants. This cold, methodical precision frightened the barbarians more than the clang of drawn swords. Modern fast food franchises pride themselves on the fact that their burgers are the same all over the world. The Roman army did the same with military bases on 3 different continents. Wherever the legion stopped, a piece of Little Rome would spring up there within 3 hours. It was the highest level of systems thinking, ahead of its time by millennia. But to make this ideal rectangular layout fit onto uneven terrain, incredible precision was required. You can't just draw a square on the ground with a stick and hope for the best. Ancient engineers needed reliable measuring instruments to bring the blueprint to life, and their tools were ingenious in their stunning simplicity. Every construction project begins with competent surveying and the proper marking of complex terrain. The Romans could not afford to set up camp in a swamp or at the bottom of a narrow gorge. A few hours before the main army arrived, a special detachment of scout engineers was always sent ahead. Their task was to find the perfect spot and prepare it for immediate construction. Choosing the right location was critical to the survival of the entire legion. The site had to be on high ground, near a clean source of drinking water. It also required a forest for firewood and pastures for the army's livestock. If the engineers made a mistake in their choice, that mistake could cost the lives of thousands of exhausted soldiers. As soon as a suitable field was found, a main marker flag was planted in the center of the future fortress. From that moment on, the Romans' primary measuring instrument, the groma, came into play. This instrument looked like a wooden cross on a pole with lead weights at the ends. It sounds primitive, but this device allowed them to measure perfect right angles on any surface. The engineer looked along the plumb lines and gave orders to his assistants with their measuring ropes. They stretched the ropes out in perfectly straight lines, forming a huge, perfect cross. These were the two main streets of the future camp, from which everything else was measured. No lasers, no satellites, just gravity and lengths of sturdy rope. Each engineer was followed by a team of surveyors carrying wooden stakes of different colors. A red stake marked the commander's tent. A white one indicated the location of a specific centuria. They ran across the field, transforming the empty ground into a detailed three-dimensional blueprint. By the time the exhausted troops arrived, the entire area was already covered with colored markers. The speed of these ancient surveyors commands deep respect from modern specialists. It took them less than an hour and a half to mark out a camp covering 50 hectares. They used measuring poles so as not to waste time constantly unwinding ropes. Every movement had been honed to perfection by thousands of previous surveys. It was of paramount importance to ensure that the camp could not be shot at from the neighboring hills. The engineers calculated the flight paths of enemy arrows using simple geometric formulas. If a hill was too close, the camp was moved to a safe distance without any arguments. Safety always took precedence over comfort or the beautiful scenery around them. When the legion's advance columns finally reached the clearing, marked out by the engineers, the magic began. The soldiers didn't need to wait for orders or figure out where to go with their heavy gear. Each maniple simply walked to its designated colored stake, set down their gear, and grabbed their shovels. The transition from an exhausting march to setting up camp took literally just a few minutes. Imagine organizing a massive open-air music festival. Today, marking out zones and setting up barriers takes weeks of work. Roman surveyors did the same for a city of 40,000 people, faster than it takes you to get to work. That level of coordination still seems like science fiction. As soon as all the soldiers had taken their places according to the markings, the hardest stage began. The perfect geometric blueprint had to be quickly transformed into a real physical barrier. The ground beneath the legionnaires' feet was to become their first and most reliable line of defense. It was time to dig as if the life of the entire empire depended on it. The construction of the fortress did not begin with the erection of high walls, but with an aggressive plunge into the earth. The first line of defense for a Roman camp was always a deep V-shaped moat running along the entire perimeter. The soldiers divided into small work groups and simultaneously began digging into the soil. The clang of thousands of shovels echoed throughout the area, announcing to the enemies the arrival of the Roman masters. Digging such a ditch after a 30-kilometer march was a trial beyond the limits of human endurance. The ground could be as hard as stone due to drought or sticky from torrential rains. But the legionnaires had no union to which they could complain about poor working conditions. They simply gritted their teeth and rhythmically tossed the earth into special woven baskets. The trench's shape was designed with devilish cunning and cruel calculation. It narrowed toward the bottom so that an enemy who fell into it in the dark could not get a proper foothold and jump out. Often, sharpened stakes were driven into the bottom, turning an ordinary trench into a deadly trap. It was a true nightmare for heavily armed barbarians attempting to storm the camp. All the earth dug out of the ditch was not simply thrown haphazardly in different directions. It was carefully carried inside the perimeter and neatly piled into a solid earthen rampart. In essence, the Romans created an artificial elevation using whatever materials were at hand. What they dug out below became a high mound right in front of the attackers. To prevent the earthen embankment from crumbling in heavy rain, it was further reinforced. Soldiers cut out pieces of thick sod and laid them like giant natural bricks. If there was no sod, they used branches, stones, and clay, tightly packed down with heavy boots. The result was a sturdy, monolithic wall capable of withstanding a battering ram. Carrying out this earthwork burned approximately 800 extra calories per soldier. Modern doctors would call this extreme physical exhaustion, requiring urgent hospitalization. But Roman commanders understood. Sweat shed on the construction site saves gallons of blood in battle. Better to tire yourself out with a shovel than to wake up with a barbarian's axe in your own chest. Interestingly, the work of excavating the earth was distributed with remarkable mathematical precision. Each legionary had to dig out his precisely measured volume of soil, no more and no less. As soon as your section reached the required depth, you could move on to the next stage. This piecework system incredibly motivated the soldiers to dig as quickly as possible. During these operations, part of the army never picked up shovels or baskets. They stood in full combat gear along the perimeter, peering intently into the darkening forest. It was an ironclad rule. The construction site must not make the army a defenseless target. The guard rotations were frequent so that the exhausted diggers could catch their breath while still holding their weapons. The speed at which this earthen barrier was erected still amazes engineers today. A moat stretching for many kilometers and a 3-meter-high rampart grew literally before the eyes of astonished local residents. What would have taken local tribes weeks of hard labor, the Romans accomplished before sunset. They reshaped the region's geography with a frightening, almost industrial efficiency. However, a bare earthen rampart still could not stop a determined and vicious enemy. Enemies could climb the slope using the shields and bodies of their fallen comrades. To turn the embankment into a truly impregnable wall, the legion needed one final touch, and the soldiers always carried that final touch with them on their own weary shoulders. A Roman camp would not have been a true fortress without a sturdy wooden wall atop the earthen rampart. Chopping down fresh timber every evening was too time-consuming, noisy, and incredibly dangerous. So Rome's ingenious logistics came up with a strikingly simple and effective solution to the problem. Each legionary carried a section of the future fortress wall right on his back during the march. These elements were called sudes, thick oak stakes about 1.5 meters long. They were sharpened at both ends and had a special taper in the middle for a comfortable grip. One soldier carried 2 or 3 of these heavy logs in addition to the rest of his equipment. In essence, the marching army was a giant portable scaffold of deadly spikes. As soon as the earthen rampart was ready and tightly packed, the assembly of the wooden puzzle began. Soldiers drove their stakes into the top of the rampart so that they interlocked tightly with one another. Thanks to their special shape, the stakes clasped securely together, forming a monolithic wooden barrier. It was practically impossible to pull a single stake out of this ingenious structure from the outside. The process of setting up the palisade took only a few minutes thanks to perfect preliminary preparation. The soldiers didn't need to saw anything, cut pieces to size, or tie them with ropes. They simply drove the stakes forcefully into the ground, forming a continuous line of sharp defense. It sounds incredibly simple, but it was precisely in this simplicity that the greatest engineering genius lay. Engineers paid special attention to protecting the gates, the most vulnerable point of any fort. A temporary camp usually had 4 gates, one on each side of the rectangle. They were never built straight so that the enemy could not use a heavy battering ram with a running start. The entrances were built as winding corridors where attackers found themselves under crossfire. Often, hidden pits with sharp stakes at the bottom were dug right in front of the gates. The Romans called these traps lilies because they resembled beautiful but deadly flowers. If enemy cavalry tried to charge through the open gates at full speed, they met their doom there. It was a brutal ancient version of modern anti-tank hedgehogs and minefields. Modern fence builders used cement, power drills, and complex metal fasteners. For the legionaries, wood, the force of gravity, and ruthless engineering calculations were enough. Their interwoven palisade flexed under impact, absorbing the kinetic energy of the attacking crowd. This wall was incredibly difficult to break through, and climbing over the sharp stakes was even harder. Imagine the horror of a Gallic or Germanic warrior watching this process unfold from the woods. The Romans arrived at an empty clearing, dug around in the ground, pulled out some sticks, and suddenly there was a fortress before them. What had seemed like easy prey had, in 3 hours, turned into an impregnable military stronghold. Many enemies simply turned around and left, refusing to storm this wooden monstrosity. Once the palisade was erected, the construction of the defensive perimeter was considered officially complete. The soldiers could finally put down their heavy tools and return to their basic duties. Inside the protected perimeter, life was already in full swing. Tents were being pitched and fires were being lit for cooking. The fortress was functioning, providing absolute safety at night for thousands of exhausted people. But how did they manage to coordinate the actions of tens of thousands of people without radios or loudspeakers? In such a huge crowd of armed people, the slightest hiccup could lead to a fatal stampede. The secret lay in a stunningly well-oiled system of division of labor, perfected to absolute precision. Every person in the camp was a cog in a massive, never-failing machine. Any large-scale modern construction site is always controlled chaos, full of shouting and conflict. The Romans hated chaos and fought it with a fanatical division of duties. When the legion approached its campsite, no one stood idly by or waited for special instructions. The entire army of thousands instantly broke into specialized work crews with clear objectives. The first group, consisting of the most experienced veterans, formed a combat guard around the construction site. They didn't touch a shovel. Their task was simply to stand with their backs to the camp and watch the forest. The second, much larger group shed their armor and immediately set to work on heavy earthworks along the perimeter. The third team, ignoring the diggers, moved inside the perimeter to set up heavy tents. Those setting up the tents also had their own strict internal hierarchy and division of roles. While some stretched the heavy leather roof, others built fires and began preparing food for everyone. Another specialized team set out to gather supplies, collecting firewood and feed for the animals. There were no overlapping routes, no one got in anyone else's way, just like on a modern Ford assembly line. This assembly line system of work allowed them to save precious minutes of the fading daylight. By the time the diggers finished building the rampart, dinner was already bubbling in the cauldrons and the beds had been made. Today we call this parallel processes in project management. The Romans applied these advanced business practices when Europe was still clad in animal skins. Centurions, the brutal and incredibly competent sergeants of the legion, played a crucial role in this system. They walked among the working soldiers with their famous vine rods in hand. This was not merely a status symbol, but a highly effective tool for physically stimulating productivity. If someone dug without enough energy, they would receive a hard blow with the vine across their back without warning. Interestingly, the soldiers of a single tent, contubernia, always worked, ate, and slept together. These 8 men were not just colleagues, they became a true combat family. If one of them slacked off while building the rampart, the entire group was punished by being deprived of a grain ration. This mutual accountability forced the soldiers to keep each other in check better than any overseer with a stick. The division of labor was so thorough that it even took into account the terrain and weather. If the soil was too rocky, engineers would instantly reassign more people to gather stones. No lengthy approvals from management or requests to change the project budget. The centurion's order was carried out at the speed of sound, turning the problem into a solved task. Compare this to modern construction standards, where every little thing requires a separate specialist. For the Romans, a carpenter could become a cook in 5 minutes, and a cook could become a ruthless killer with a sword. This interchangeability made the system incredibly resilient to any personnel losses. The legion continued to build the camp at the same pace, having lost nearly 1/10 of its men. It was precisely this ideal distribution of effort that allowed the soldiers, exhausted after a march, to conserve calories. No one made unnecessary movements. No one wasted energy on pointless running around the camp. Each soldier burned exactly as many calories as were required to perform his specific task. Under conditions of severe food shortages, this was the ideal strategy for collective survival. But even the best system would have collapsed without the foundation upon which all of Rome stood. Logistics and a smart division of labor alone were not enough to manage tens of thousands of armed men. It took a force capable of making a man exhausted to the point of death dig a hole in the frozen ground. That force was called absolute, ruthless military discipline, which knew no compromise. In modern armies, disobeying an order usually leads to a court-martial and a prison sentence. In the Roman legion, refusing to dig a trench led to a swift and very painful death. Discipline was the supreme deity of the Roman army, worshipped more than Jupiter or Mars. Fear of one's own commanders was always supposed to exceed fear of enemy swords. If a centurion noticed that a defensive rampart had been built carelessly, punishment followed immediately. The guilty party could be publicly flogged in front of the entire formation to deter others from slacking off on the construction site. But the most dreaded punishment was decimation, the execution of every 10th man by lot. This threat hung in the air, forcing the legionaries to drive every stake into the ground with maniacal precision. It sounds incredibly cruel, but the generals were guided by a simple and very cynical logic. A poorly constructed camp at night could lead to the death of an entire legion of 5,000 men. Therefore, sacrificing the life of a single lazy soldier for the survival of all the others was considered justified. In this harsh world, there was no place for democracy or the protection of a hired worker's rights. Even when the army was deep in the rear, on friendly and completely safe territory, the camp was still built to the full extent. Soldiers were forbidden to relax or violate the sacred ritual of erecting defensive structures. Commanders understood that habit is second nature to a person. If soldiers were allowed to skip digging a trench just once, tomorrow they would forget how to hold a shovel. This paranoid system of control led to construction becoming a spinal reflex. Soldiers didn't need to think about why they were digging that damned hole in a safe place. The body performed the memorized movements on its own, while the brain rested after a grueling day's march. Modern military instructors call this drilling a skill down to the level of subconscious motor skills. Interestingly, this discipline extended to maintaining perfect cleanliness within the camp. Toilets were always dug outside the perimeter, downstream from the drinking water source. A soldier would receive severe corporal punishment for littering the streets or contaminating the water. This saved the army from dysentery epidemics, which decimated other ancient armies more effectively than enemy arrows. The night watch was yet another test of Rome's brutal discipline. If a sentry fell asleep on duty by the wooden wall, he was tried in the morning by his comrades in arms. The punishment was almost always being stoned or beaten to death with clubs right at the scene of the crime. No one wanted to wake up with their throat slit just because a neighbor decided to take a quick nap. Modern office workers often complain about toxic management and tight deadlines. Imagine a deadline where, if you miss it, your own colleagues will literally stone you to death. It was under precisely these conditions that the famous resilience of the Roman infantry was forged. They feared violating the code of conduct more than they feared an attacking mob of enraged Celtic berserkers. This iron grip transformed the legion into a single living organism, blindly obeying the will of the general's brain. The tools in the soldiers' hands moved in unison, like the pistons of a giant ancient engine. No panic, no unnecessary questions, only the clang of shovels and the dull thuds of oak stakes. This industrial noise was, in itself, Rome's most powerful psychological weapon. Enemies watching this process were overcome by a genuine existential horror at what they saw. They understood that before them stood not merely an army of men, but some kind of ruthless machine of flesh and steel. The Romans broke the enemy's will even before the first sword was drawn. And these rapidly erected wooden walls played a decisive role in this psychological pressure. Victory in ancient wars was often achieved not in bloody combat, but in the minds of the enemy. The Romans were masterful at psychological pressure and manipulating the minds of the masses. Building the camp in a single night was not only a defensive measure, but also a grand theatrical performance. The main audience for this show was enemy scouts hiding in the surrounding forests. Imagine you are the leader of a Gallic tribe planning a nighttime ambush on the weary invaders. You watch as the massive serpent of the legion slithers into an empty clearing at sunset. You wait for them to drop their belongings and fall asleep so you can slit their throats in the dark. But instead, they pull out strange tools and begin to reshape the landscape itself. In just 3 hours, a gloomy wooden monster with high walls rises from the empty space. The perfect geometry of the moats and ramparts screams that these people do not obey the laws of the wild. The barbarians, who had spent months building their crooked villages, looked on with superstitious, primal horror. They began to think that the Romans were aided by powerful, evil underground gods. The psychological impact of this industrial marvel was absolutely devastating to the barbarians' morale. If these people can build a city in a single evening, what will they do to us tomorrow on the battlefield? This simple thought caused many tribes to surrender without a fight or flee in panic deeper into the forests. The Roman camp functioned as a giant billboard advertising the empire's invincibility. Even when the enemy decided to storm the camp, the psychological advantage remained with Rome. Standing on a safe, high rampart, the legionary felt like the confident master of the situation. He looked down on the disorganized crowd trying to make its way through the stakes in the moat. This sense of absolute superiority made the Roman soldier even more deadly in battle. Moreover, having a secure base completely changed the tactics of protracted warfare. The legion did not have to retreat if the battle was going poorly for Rome. They would simply withdraw in an orderly fashion behind the walls of their camp and wait for reinforcements from the capital. The enemy understood that it was now physically impossible to destroy the Roman army in a single assault. This drove the barbarian chieftains to utter despair and nervous breakdowns. You could defeat the Romans in open battle, but the next morning they were back in their fortress. Like a cancerous tumor, they took root in your land every damn night. It was impossible to get rid of them. It was impossible to catch them off guard with a sudden night attack. Sometimes legion commanders would deliberately order their troops to set up camp right under the enemy army's nose. They brazenly built their fortifications within arrow's range of the enemy camp. It was a display of absolute, almost insulting self-confidence and contempt for the enemy. The Romans seemed to be saying, "We are building a home here, and there is nothing you can do about it." Today, this is comparable to special forces arriving at a terrorist's house and starting to build a police station there. The audacity of such a maneuver paralyzed the enemy's will, robbing them of all initiative. The Roman shovel dug the grave of the enemy's self-confidence in a matter of hours. It was a war of nerves in which ancient engineers always emerged as the absolute victors. But the empire could not live forever in temporary wooden forts on the fringes of civilization. As borders expanded and were secured, the camps required a major evolution. Portable wooden stakes had to give way to something far more monumental. And here, Roman engineers once again proved their total superiority over the rest of the world. The temporary field camp that the legionaries built every evening was called a castra estiva. It was designed for a couple of nights and for use exclusively during the warm summer months. But wars tend to drag on through the long winter months, when sleeping in a leather tent becomes deadly cold. For such cases, Roman engineers developed the concept of permanent winter quarters. Winter forts were built according to the same strict rectangular plan, but using permanent materials. Instead of portable stakes, thick tree trunks were cut, and instead of tents, wooden barracks were erected. The earthen rampart was replaced by a full-fledged wall made of wood and tightly rammed clay. This was no longer just a place to spend the night, but a fortified military town capable of withstanding a long siege. If a province was finally conquered, a legion could remain in one place for decades. In such cases, the wooden walls were torn down and massive stone bastions rose in their place. Inside, permanent barracks, luxurious officers' quarters, fully equipped hospitals, and even bathhouses were built. The Romans never denied themselves basic comforts, even when stationed at the edge of the known world. Stone fortresses were built with the same obsession with geometry and strict standardization. Two main intersecting streets, a forum in the center, and perfectly square residential quarters. These military bases became powerful economic centers, attracting local merchants and artisans. Civilian settlements, cannabises, quickly sprang up around the impregnable stone walls. It's interesting that most major European cities began their history precisely as Roman forts. London, Vienna, Cologne, Manchester, all of them grew out of those very rectangular military blueprints. The geometry of the streets in the historic centers of these metropolises still follows the layout of ancient engineers. You walk along the very same lines that were once drawn by ancient lead-lined walls. The transformation of a temporary camp into a stone city demonstrates the incredible scalability of Roman technology. The same basic concept worked for both tents and multi-ton stone blocks. Modern startups can only dream of such a universal and easily scalable system architecture. The Romans laid the foundation for European urban planning without even realizing it. Building a permanent stone base took years of hard labor and thousands of tons of materials. But the soldiers did not complain, for the stone wall gave them an illusion of safety and a taste of home. Inside the fort, one could buy wine, visit the baths, and forget about the wild forests outside. It was an isolated island of ancient civilization in the midst of a barbaric, hostile ocean. It was precisely these stone monsters on the empire's borders that allowed Rome to hold on to its territories for so long. Enemies could plunder villages, but they were unable to storm professionally built fortresses. The system of fortifications functioned as a filter that let small raids through but crushed large armies. Engineering became the empire's main shield, replacing thousands of soldiers. The transition from the shovel to the stone chisel marked the end of Rome's era of rapid conquests. The legions slept in temporary camps less and less often, preferring the comfort of permanent barracks. The army slowly transformed from a mobile strike force into a cumbersome border guard, and this loss of mobility became one of the many reasons for the empire's ultimate fall. But as long as the system of temporary camps worked, it was unmatched on the battlefield. However, this system was utterly ruthless toward those who tried to ignore its strict rules. The slightest deviation from regulations on a construction site could trigger a chain reaction of catastrophic events. Ancient history is full of bloody lessons about what happens when a legion decides to save time. The Roman war machine seemed invincible as long as the cogs within it turned according to strict rules. But as soon as discipline slackened and work was cut corners on the construction site, retribution came instantly. History records instances when overconfident commanders decided not to waste time digging a deep trench after a march. The result was almost always a brutal massacre of sleeping soldiers under the cover of night. The most famous disaster resulting from neglecting fortifications was the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. The Roman legions marched through dense forest and were unable to set up their standard rectangular camp. They broke the golden rule and pitched their tents haphazardly without a proper ditch or a sturdy palisade. The Germanic tribes simply tore the disorganized army to pieces, completely annihilating 3 legions. The enemies knew perfectly well how the Roman engineering system worked and were constantly looking for its weak spots. They watched the construction from their hiding places, searching for a section where the rampart was slightly lower than usual. If the soldiers of a single centuria were too lazy to drive the stakes deep enough, that was exactly where the enemy wedge would strike at night. In this harsh world, sloppiness was literally measured by the blood of your tent mates. Sometimes the problem lay in the advanced scout's poor choice of location for the future camp. If the camp was set up in a low-lying area during heavy rain, the ditch turned into a trap for the Romans themselves. Water flooded the tents, ruined precious grain supplies, and rendered the bowstrings unusable. Nature punished the legions for their engineering mistakes just as ruthlessly as the barbarians' axes. To avoid such tragedies, the Romans developed a multi-level quality control system at the construction site. Before the soldiers could go to sleep, every meter of the rampart was personally inspected by senior officers. If a centurion found a poorly driven stake, the entire brigade was roused and had to redo the work. This paranoia infuriated the exhausted soldiers, but it was precisely what allowed them to survive until the next dawn. Compare this approach to modern construction sites, where mistakes are often hidden under a layer of cheap plaster. A Roman soldier could not cover up a defect because that defect would cost him his own head the next day. Such personal, life-or-death responsibility for the outcome of their work created an unprecedented level of quality. Ancient quality control was based on the instinct for self-preservation, not on paper standards. The irony is that the Romans themselves became hostages to their own ideal construction system. They had grown so accustomed to relying on walls that they felt uncomfortable in open fields without fortifications. Over time, the army grew lazier and increasingly refused to dig deep trenches every evening. The barbarians noticed this weakness and began methodically breaching the borders of an empire decaying from within. The decline in discipline within the legions of the late empire directly affected the quality of their field camps. The ditches became shallower, the wooden walls thinner, and the perfect geometry turned into uneven circles. Along with the loss of engineering skills, Rome also lost its total military superiority over its neighbors. When the legionnaires forgot how to handle a shovel, they very quickly forgot how to win as well. This is a classic example of how neglecting boring basic rules destroys great systems. What was built with the blood and sweat of their ancestors was destroyed by the simple human laziness of their descendants. But the principles they established at the height of their greatness have forever entered the history of architecture. And we have much to learn from them today, despite the difference in technology. Rome's engineering legacy is not just beautiful marble statues, or the ruins of the massive Colosseum. It is, first and foremost, the idea that order, logistics, and standards can overcome any chaos. An ordinary soldier with a shovel changed the map of the world more profoundly than the most brilliant politicians in the Senate. And this thought smoothly leads us to the final conclusions of our historical excursion. Today we build structures out of steel and concrete, using lasers, drones, and complex computer models. But if we look at the very essence of the processes, Roman project management principles have remained absolutely unchanged. Strict standardization of components, a clear division of labor, and flawless logistics still rule the world of engineering. The Romans invented this operating system long before the first computer appeared. We often perceive the history of the ancient world as an era of primitive savages with iron swords. But Roman surveyors with measuring ropes were closer to modern engineers than to their barbarian neighbors. They used mathematics and geometry as weapons, and these weapons proved incredibly effective. Intelligence and planning triumphed over the brute animal strength of the barbarian tribes. Imagine if modern corporations adopted even a fraction of this ruthless Roman efficiency. Project completion times would be drastically reduced, and the word deadline would regain its original, fateful meaning. Of course, we can't whip employees with a lash for a poorly stretched mesh on the facade. But we can certainly learn from Rome the art of perfectly distributing roles within a team. It's amusing to realize that the foundation of one of the greatest empires in human history was a simple earthen pit. The sweat of soldiers poured over this pit after an exhausting march cemented Rome's borders better than any mortar. They literally buried their enemies' ambitions in trenches across the vast expanse of Europe. And this hard labor deserves sincere respect even after 1,000 years. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new incredible stories about the forgotten technologies of the ancient world. Let us know in the comments. Could you build a house after walking 30 kilometers? Until we meet again on the pages of our amazing and ruthless history.